So people wonder why I talk about inflation so much. Well, I think really this is a unique time, one of the most unique times we've had in the last 40 or 50 years where you can actually take advantage of it, right? Well, I believe it is here to stay, and it will take years for the Federal Reserve and other things to get inflation under control. And I'm gonna give some reasons why I see that. Obviously, you're seeing the pain everywhere, right? Inflation is high when you're filling up the pump, you feel it. You feel it at the store, you feel it when you're traveling, you feel it with hotels and Amazon and everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's gonna stay high for years. And I'm gonna explain why. If you look back at the 70s and 80s, you see inflation was high, interest rates and inflation were close to 20%. And it wasn't until 1985 or 1990, if you actually look at kind of where the inflation numbers got back to around 4 or 5%, right? So take a look at that. It's unbelievable. So we're going to jump in 3 steps about what you can do to take advantage of inflation because it's going to stay perpetually high. It's not transitory, it's here to stay. And if you're prepared, you will be able to take advantage of it. Okay, so as we jump in here, just a reminder, we have a great quote for you at the end, so stick around to the very end. We've got some awesome stuff to share at the end. So inflation is gonna stay high for years. So the question comes back to, if we dial it back, why do we have high inflation? Well, Milton Friedman, the great economist, said that inflation is anywhere and everywhere. It's a monetary phenomenon. What that means is that it has to do with how much money you create. If you create more money, you're going to eventually get more inflation. It doesn't happen right away, but you're going to get it. And so we see that, right? We see that in everything. So with COVID as well, that even exacerbated this even more, right? Because we have supply and demand, right? Supply being goods and services available. We told people, hey, stay at home. Here's your checks. People are getting more, sometimes up to 40% more money to stay at home than they were to go to work. So what would you do, right? I'd just stay at home. Hey, take the money, no big deal. So they basically gave people more money to stay at home. There's less goods and services being created. There's supply chain, other issues for this reason. All around the world, we're seeing this. So there's less goods and services here. And then the second thing is you created all this new currency, right? So there's all this new demand, all this new currency, or 40.9% new currency creation, physically or digitally, over a 2-year period from February of 2020 to February of 2022. You can see in the chart, this big pop of currency. So you've got more money chasing fewer goods and services. That is a recipe for high inflation, and it's going to be perpetual for several reasons. There's a guy named Peter Zeihan that I just finished this book. It's called The End of the World is Just the Beginning, and he talks about this rise in nationalism, and we're seeing it, right? There are some trade wars happening, and this idea that basically what we've experienced now in the world may never happen again, that at some point there could be some sort of war that breaks out or something, and all of a sudden this free trade and stuff just traveling internationally all over may not exist in the way that it does right now. So that will again reduce the supply of critical goods. We're even trying to say in the US, how do we get chips instead of getting them from China or getting things that we're getting from China? How can we create them ourselves or get them from other partners? And this is getting to be challenging, and it's just going to lead to higher costs for everything. So we're going to jump into why that is going to be perpetual and also what the Fed is going to do about it. All right, so the Fed is about to reverse course. Now, this is not a popular opinion, but I believe it to be true. If you look at this chart from my friend Jeff Clark, he basically says that the average is about 5 months the Fed will raise rates for, and then they'll start lowering rates again. You can see historically the longest was 13 months, right? So it typically, they'll raise rates for a period of time, and then they will start lowering rates. And we're already at least at the time of this video, about 8-9 months into it. So it's in a series of time. I think it's going to happen, and it's just a matter of when. So a recession can really be a tipping point for that. If something in the financial system breaks, they can say, oh, this is a crisis, we need to return, and then something's gonna happen, and they're gonna suddenly return back to going to start to lower rates again. So we're seeing it, single family housing is slowing down. We're seeing a lot of assets, things that people were just booming into, now they're starting to slow down again. So there's higher inflation right now, there's higher asset prices. When rates actually start lowering again, asset prices, I think, will go up. So I think that's one way to actually think about it too, is that when you buy real estate, your buying price is fixed, but your interest rate can be adjusted later. Now, how is that possible, right? It's through a refinance. If you're paying 7% interest rate, what's gonna happen in 2-3 years if rates are down to 3 or 4 or 5% again, right? People are gonna say, oh man, I wish I had bought all this real estate. So that's something to think about with the Fed is going to reverse course. So Jay Powell, he wants to be Paul Volcker, right? Paul Volcker was the head of the Federal Reserve back in the 70s and 80s. He took rates, the Federal Reserve fund rate, all the way to about 20%, 18 to 20%. Over a short period of time. Inflation was high, almost 20%, and he broke the back of inflation by bringing the interest rates that high. Well, it's been said, even Paul Volcker actually said this before he passed away, that he could not raise interest rates to that level in the more common era. This is before he passed. He's obviously not been around to be able to share that lately, but at the time, this is really the primary reason. The debt to GDP ratio at the time Volcker was raising rates really high was 33%. So that means there was 33% debt for how much our whole country produces. And now we're above 100%. It's expected to go, projected to go over 200% in the next few years. So how is that even possible? You can see on this chart, it's just we're looking at just continual debt. If debt is that high and rates go high, the debt becomes unmanageable. So they eventually are going to have to start lowering rates again. So the question with all that, okay, the Fed's going to reverse course, Bronson, I get it. Inflation's here to stay. What do I do about it? Well, I'm glad you asked. So I wrote this ebook. It's called How to Use Inflation to Your Advantage. 50 pages. You can check it out in the link below. It's on my website, bronsonequity.com. And it gives some strategies here. How do you do this? You use real estate. You basically buy assets that pay you to hold them, right? So if you're buying something that has an inflation hedge, if we could put up a chart here that shows, inflation and rents really go hand in hand. And then if you're buying assets that, are, something with rents, particularly multifamily or larger deals, it's going to basically allow you to weather that no matter what happens in the economy. So using good debt, I'm not talking about credit card debt, I'm talking about debt that actually is buying great assets. And if you can borrow for a long period of time at a lower rate to buy assets that will appreciate over time, it can be very, very valuable. And there's some other things I talk about in the ebook. You can check that out. But, in summary, just get prepared for inflation being here for a long time. So how do you store wealth? What do you do? What are some things that you should do? It will eat up more of your dollars unless you have a plan to be able to deploy it. So a lot of people I know these days are just saying, I'm just not going to invest. I'm going to wait it out. Well, if you wait, Shadow Stats says inflation is not 8 or 9%. It says more like 15 to 18%. You can go to shadowstats.com and look at their alternative inflation numbers. It's very high. So in that case, if it's that high, it means if you sit on cash over the next 2 years, you're losing 35 to 40% of your wealth over the next 2 years. Ouch, right? It doesn't mean you're losing. It's not like $20 is not going to be $20. It's just $20 will buy you a lot less than it bought before. So I want to share this quote with you, which I think you will enjoy. And what it is from Llewellyn Rockwell. He's a libertarian author. And he says this: never forget that government has no wealth of its own to spend. The money has to come from taxation, monetary inflation, or debt expansion that must be paid later. And government spending choices will always be uneconomic relative to how a society would use that wealth. That is to say, money will be wasted. So think about that. The government doesn't really have any money. The only way it can basically spend and do these things that it's doing is by creating new currency. It can just create more of these. And what does this do? This actually steals from other people that own dollars in, it's kind of crazy. You think about it. Like, I've got this amount of dollars and they can just create as much as they want. And so, again, you can see that you're very disadvantaged if you just hold cash, because it really, there's no hedge against them just creating more and more and more. So if you're interested, I did this awesome panel with a few really smart dudes, Rick Rule, George Gammon, Mark Moss. You can check it out up here. It's about your inflation choices. So check out that video. I'd love to know in the comments what it is you're doing in an era of high inflation to take advantage of it. So, my friend, I look forward to seeing you on the next video.